Hello, I'm Tim Russ. Live long and podcast.
Hello and good morning for this April 5th, 2025, and happy first contact day to you out there. I'm Dave Mader here on Live Long and Podcast, and we're doing another edition of the Captain's Yacht interview series. And today, my guest is YouTube star and sensational political activist, Steve Shives. If you have not checked out his channel yet, I highly recommend you do. Steve has been on our channel before, participating in things like Star Trek Radio Theater, and he sat in on some of our panels for Deep Space Nine. And it's been a minute though, Steve, since we've chatted. So hello to you and happy first contact day.
Happy first contact day to you, and thank you for inviting me coincidentally on this day. I think you mentioned in your one of your first or your second email when we decided to do it on this day, you were like, "Oh, by the way, that's first contact day," and I was like, "Oh, hey, it is." So happy first contact day, everybody!
Happy first
Good to be here.
Contact day to you, and thrilled to have you with us this morning. This is a live stream, so we might get some live comments. So we'll try to get to those if we can, although it is very early, so we'll see if how many people are up at this time. So Steve, how have you been?
Yes, sir. I have been very good considering the fact that the entire world is falling apart. Whenever I can kind of pull myself away from the chaos of just everything and focus on things that are going on in my own private life and focus on things that actually give me joy, things are going pretty good. So, and I'm privileged to have that option. That I'm able to kind of step away from all of the depressing stuff and recharge and, So for me personally, things are going pretty well lately.
Great. Glad to hear that. Yeah, it's been a hell of a time. It's been a hell of a time in our lives, or in our history. Of course, as you know, I'm Canadian. You are American, and that used to matter a lot less, but it feels like these days it seems to be more of a thing. With the trade war that's kicked off, not just between Canada and the U.S., but with the United States and the entire world. That's
right. Well, and you know what worries me is William Shatner, because I remember a lot of people, maybe people younger than me don't remember this, but way back in the day, William Shatner did a skit on Late Night with Conan O'Brien where he said, "I'm Canadian, and that means if Canada ever goes to war with the United States, it would be my solemn duty as a patriot to kill as many Americans as I can." So, and he's still, I mean, he's 94 now, but he's still pretty spry for his age. So I would be keeping one eye on him, because I know he lives in Los Angeles now. All the Americans surrounding him, just don't take your eyes off Shatner.
Yes,
because he's a
all
loyal
of his
Canadian.
family too are American.
That's true. Yeah, like so. I mean, hopefully he's forgotten that he made that pledge. But just in case.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting with the political ad, because we're having our election right now for the Canadian Prime Minister, and Mike Myers did an ad with Mark Carney, the Liberal leader, about, he's like, "Don't you live in the States?" And he was like, "Yeah, but always be Canadian." And gives like the whole thing.
And then he did the Mike Myers thing. Yeah.
So definitely there's all of our Canadian exports, they might be secret agents. They may have to be thrown in internment camps. That sounds like it is a joke. I do mean it as a joke, but it sounds more realistic.
So when it inevitably does happen, when they do inevitably, throw Martin Short into an ice camp.
Yes.
You were kidding when you said that.
I was kidding. I was just kidding, but now it feels more real, and it feels like I shouldn't joke about such things at this time.
Martin Short would be so funny in an ice camp, though. He would be making jokes about everything. I mean, I'm not saying that's a good enough reason to do it. I'm just saying that would be the silver lining on the cloud, because Martin Short would absolutely demolish.
Martin Short is one of our national treasures. He is a gem. I love Martin Short. He's just from Hamilton, which is just one city over from me. So I'm a big fan. Now, Steve, I want to say that you're equal parts, I'd say, politics and Star Trek videos in terms of your YouTube content. Would you say, or
yeah, these days I would say it's kind of ebbed and flowed over the years, but nowadays I would say it's pretty much, more or less one or the other, and
Right.
probably roughly 50-50, I would guess, but I don't keep track of it.
And your political videos, they tend to be in reaction to something that's come out of the news, something that's current, something that's big,
Sure.
and that seems to be an everyday occurrence now. So perhaps your
Yeah,
production there has stepped up as a result.
definitely.
And it's been an inspiration for me. You and several other YouTubers, those on the left, who I think have actually had clear, concise voices about what is so messed up with the politics of the right, but just what's going on with this Trump administration. But even before all of that, and and it seems like compared to like mainstream media, which can be kind of frustrating to listen to, and can be more, I don't know, pragmatic, more political, more try to be less calling out. Sometimes you just gotta say, hey, a duck's a duck and it looks like a duck, sort of thing.
Absolutely. Well, and I think, I don't really have anyone to answer to other than myself. I mean, I have to keep within community guidelines and YouTube standards and stuff like that. But in terms of like, nobody decides what I make a video about but me. And what I have discovered, to my great relief over the years, is that if I do make a video where I just talk honestly about what's on my mind, there will be an audience for that. Like, there are people, not because they care, not because there's anything special about me, not because they're like, oh, I wonder what Steve has to say, but because I think I'm the same way. People, you just want to hear other people who you regard as somewhat reasonable give you their thoughts on things. So you know what's going on. So you know what other people are thinking. So maybe their thinking can inform yours, not necessarily in terms of the facts, but just maybe I'll say something that will click a switch in your head and you'll think, oh, I never thought about that. And then that will lead you somewhere else. And it's a conversation, even though we're not, except for live streams where you and I can actually talk in real time. It's a conversation,
Yeah.
It's just the same reason why people used to read op-eds in the newspaper, and I guess a small amount of people still do. It's that kind of thing. It's just keeping these issues in the air. Yeah.
Yeah, editorial. Are you always scripted with your videos, or do you do any off the cuff?
No. For several years I was, and then last year in the run-up to the election in our country, the election that Trump unfortunately won, I started doing more off-the-cuff videos. All of the Star Trek videos and the pop culture related videos, for the most part, are scripted, and some of the political ones are, but most of the ones that I throw up that are like in response to like a news event or a political thing that just happened, those are not fully scripted. Those are mostly off the cuff. I might write down some bullet points so that I don't get lost or I don't ramble on too long, but those are not fully scripted. But like all of the longer form Star Trek stuff and Superman and Batman and that kind of, the pop culture related things, those are all fully scripted.
Cool. And I think they're invaluable because I think a lot of times we're looking for somewhere to, I don't know, just a voice, right? I think, I'm not even American, and so, but what happens in your country directly affects everybody, especially Canada. And so we're always kind of just watching sort of like, what the hell is going to happen? What's going to be said? The results of this election. And, I think voices like yours, Kyle Kalinske, and some others who are on the left that I think are just, like, hey, we're not trading in our values. We're not trading in our opinions just because he won the election, which is what it kind of felt like with CNN and some of these other outlets.
And I think that's important too, is that unfortunately the mainstream news media in the United States over the last 35 years or so has become almost exclusively for profit, which means that a news division or for a major television network or a cable channel like CNN has to turn a profit. And it used to be back in the day, back when I was just a wee little child, news divisions were considered to be financial losers for the network, but that was okay because it was a public service.
Right.
It was sort of that's what you offer the people in exchange for the government giving you the right to use the airwaves to broadcast your network and make money doing everything else you do. And that was never like official, but it was just kind of the arrangement. It was sort of an understanding. Like, yes, then we're not necessarily trying to make money reporting the news, but we do it as a service to the people because it makes society better for everybody to know what's going on, for everybody to have reliable sources of what's happening in the world. And at some point, they decided, sort of one at a time, and it became a domino effect, to start making news divisions profitable instead of just accepting that in order to pursue their mission, they weren't going to always generate profit for the network. And that has led to things like CNN and the Washington Post and the New York Times and, NBC News and CBS News and all of these other, like, once, stalwart news outlets, that whether you agreed with what they said on their op-ed page or not, you could at least look in the news section and say, oh, okay, I can trust this. This isn't coming from any particular political point of view. Now you can't rely on that so much because you're like, oh, Trump's the president. We better shift our focus now so we don't piss him off because we don't want to lose access to the White House or, whatever. It's not a good situation.
It's not and totally. I used to watch this show called The Newsroom that was on HBO, and they kind of talked about that.
Yeah,
it was like a lost leader sort of thing where the news is not meant to be profitable, but then all of a sudden it did become profitable. I guess with commercials, 24-hour news cycle, which is not healthy, and something.
No,
like, I think in both countries we need to address this, but I think it's worse in the States because it's just so much more. There's just so much more money around it with the like. Every time I watch like CNN, I don't know, there's like pharmaceutical ads and all this kind of stuff. But I digress. Norman saying, "How we miss Walter Cronkite and the fairness doctrine," of which I was a kid then. Yeah, and just give me the facts and let me make up my own mind is also, I think, something we miss, and because there's so much more commentary.
And I mean, there are still outlets that do that. I mean, here in the States, we have PBS and NPR, our main public broadcasters, and they do a pretty good job, although they have sort of, been criticized a time or two in the past for being too biased in one way or the other, either for being too biased, toward the left or for, capitulating to the right in some ways. But overall, I think they're pretty fair and reliable, but they don't have the reach of, an NBC News or a CNN or something like that. Like they don't have as large of an audience, and they're not driving the culture as much. So, right. Yeah.
And in Canada, what we're struggling with is, like, we have a few news outlets and media outlets, but like the most traditional one, the most entrenched one is the CBC, the Canadian Broadcast Corporation, our version of the BBC, basically.
Yeah.
And right now in our election, we have the Conservative Party, who's very against the CBC because they see it as sort of a left-leaning outlet that is, and to a certain extent that might be true. And the CBC relies on public funding, basically from the government, in order to sort of survive. And so the Conservatives are running on this platform of, we're going to cut the CBC's funding and we're going to take this away, which I find only makes the CBC and some of their political shows and their reporting to be even more excited in terms of how they're reporting on the Conservatives and the Liberals and the nature of the election, and to try to keep them completely impartial, completely like sort of separated from that, is something that I think we need. But again, I don't have the magic solution either. But because they tried to introduce this law up here where it was like, okay, if everyone's getting their news from Facebook and YouTube and Google and whatever, then there should just be like a fee that goes to the news outlet from Facebook. Like if that link gets so many clicks,
right,
it's going to come here. Australia tried to do the same thing, and then these tech giants said, no, we're not doing that, so...
you have to keep giving it to us for free so we can only be the ones to make money on it.
Right, and so now you can't even post a news article in Canada or on Facebook or whatever, because they don't want to get into that. Because we used to buy like a newspaper for like 25 cents, and that's how that kind of funded the outlet. But there's no that direct sponsorship correlation. Anyway, I'm going on a tangent here.
It's a tangent that's understandable for you to go on. It sounds very familiar to me as an American too. I mean, conservatives in this country are always trying to kill our public broadcasters, our NPR and PBS being the main ones. And the most ridiculous thing in our case is that yes, like PBS and NPR do receive public funding, but that's only a portion of their budgets. Like most of the financial support for our public broadcasters comes through direct donations from the public, like people like me who just choose to support them. And that's most of their support. It doesn't come exclusively from like a government grant. But Republicans still really, really hate it. And still really, and it's like their excuse is you're wasting tax dollars to give people like a biased, slanted view of the news. But public tax dollars are like that much of their budget, but it's not, so that's not what they really have a problem with. They have a problem with the fact that it exists. And I suspect that's the same thing up in Canada with the CBC. It's not, well, it's the money, but it's not really the money, is it? It's the fact that this outlet exists that is a threat to you.
That is, in their mind, is pushing voters towards the left or towards progressive ideas or whatever, because a lot of times journalists do tend to be educated and sort of intellectual, and they might have more left. Like, it's kind of funny how like the left has now become the party of like the intellectuals, but that's kind of or the side, I guess, the political side of the spectrum. Because in our country it's like the Liberal Party, and then to the left of them we have like the New Democrats and the Greens as well. But it's this idea that if like we have to not have media so that the conservatives can do better. I don't know. It seems wrong. Okay. Well, that's a lot of politics talk. I also want to talk to you about Star Trek.
Absolutely.
So, and you're, I think we've talked about it before, but it's been a few years since we've chatted. So I wanted to talk about your early life as well.
Okay.
So I know you're 3 years older than me. I know you're from Maryland, and I know
I am.
You're a most of the time vegetarian.
Yes, I am. That's an excellent way to describe it. I am a most of the time vegetarian.
So but I want to get into things that maybe I don't know so much about you. So did you grow up in Maryland as well?
Yes, I am Maryland, born and raised, and still living there. Absolutely.
And were you an only child, or you got siblings?
No. I have a younger brother, Danny, who also still lives in Maryland, who is more successful than me because he's an auto mechanic. So he's gonna have a job as long as he wants one. But yeah, that's my only sibling, my younger brother Dan. He is 5 years my junior. So
okay, so a little bit younger than me as well.
Yeah.
And so you lived in Maryland, you and your brother. What did your parents do?
My mom was a stay-at-home mom for most of my childhood, and then eventually she got some part-time jobs. She worked at the video store in town. Boy, that takes you back. There used to be video stores where people could work. And in my little hometown of Clear Spring, where the population was like 300 people, like I'm talking small town. Wow. We had a video store.
One video store?
One video store, 2 bars, 2 liquor stores, 1 video store. And so she worked there for a while, and then she got a job at like, a gas station or, like other sort of local businesses to just pick up like part-time work. And my dad had been in the Navy. He did 2 tours in the United States Navy. And then he got a job working in the maintenance department of a state hospital nearby. And he worked there for 30 some years. And now I'll say happily retired.
Yeah,
he's happy to be retired. He's not always happy, but he's happy to be retired. So.
Like my dad. Yeah. Okay. And so, did anything with your dad's background in the Navy? Did that have any influence on how you got introduced to Star Trek, or?
It didn't, but because he was in the Navy, and my grandfather, his father, had also been in the Navy. And because of that, and they weren't officers or anything, they were just enlisted. But because of that, and because I was interested in it through them, when there were sort of parallels between the real life Navy and Star Trek, like I did kind of pick that up. Like I picked up pretty early on that the rank system for the officers in Starfleet is basically just lifted from the naval ranks. Right. That like, because for the most part, there are little exceptions here and there, but for the most part, Starfleet officers, they don't have colonels and generals. They have captains and admirals. And I'm like, oh, that's naval. They and which makes sense because it's a much more obvious reference for Starfleet to be a naval service than to be, something that's an analog to the Army. Yeah. Yeah, because they have ships.
Roddenberry had been in the Air Force himself during
Yeah.
the war. But he's
Yeah.
like, no, it makes sense to be naval. They're on ships, and you would have a captain of the ship, and etc.
Right.
And sorry, I had a thought there that I just popped out of my head. With the naval system, well, it's more specifically the United States Navy too, because like you think about the rank systems where you say lieutenant and lieutenant commander, but instead of lieutenant and lieutenant commander.
That's right. Yeah, it's not like
Canada.
Yeah, yeah. Except I think when somebody no well no when Q calls him when Q calls Picard he pronounces it oddly but he doesn't say lieutenant, he says lieutenant in Tapestry. Like, well, what seems to be the trouble, Lieutenant Picard?
Lieutenant, yeah, because he gives like the German pronunciation. But
he's doing Sigmund Freud, yeah.
In French, it'd be like lieutenant.
Yeah.
Or yeah, and like I got corrected by I had some people in the Canadian Armed Forces that I knew, and they were saying it's lieutenant. Don't say it like an American. And they made a little thing.
How dare you?
My whole life, and I just thought, oh, it's lieutenant. I always say lieutenant.
Yeah.
It's the American version of all that. Along
It's
with,
one of those little. It's one of those tells where I mean, even though Star Trek is now like an international thing and it has fans all over the world, I mean, originally it's an extremely American thing.
Yes.
I mean, even though it tries to be progressive and it tries to be inclusive, much to its credit, that's one of the things I love about it. But it's, it carries the stamp of its origins, as Darwin might say. Like it's a very, very American show, and you can tell, that it was produced first for an American audience, and then was sent out to the rest of the world. And it's little things like that, like the ranks and the pronunciations,
or even like the prefix of the ship, like USS.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. That's a big one.
Corresponds to the United States ship prefix that your Navy has. But,
yeah.
In that it's United Federation of Planets Starship.
Yeah, it doesn't really make sense. They kind of have to sort of wrestle it to make it make sense. Oh, it's the United Spaceship. Oh, okay. Why would it be that? It just is.
It just is. It's United. They're not.
Look, we all know why. Okay, it's because our ships are that. So the Star Trek ships are like that's basically it. You just have to shrug. Okay, it's fine.
And there's that whole episode in the original series, the Omega Glory, where they find the U.S. Constitution.
Oh man.
And William Shatner, of course, a Canadian, but he's doing these lines, of course, as Kirk, and he's like, no, in all of our history, no one has ever put these words down quite as beautifully as this. We the people, and like, I don't know. And as a non-American, you're just kind of like,
okay. Let the Americans get it out of their system. Let them wave their little flag and feel good about themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
Which when they bring like Picard along, who's still to date the only one of these Star Trek captains who's like not an American.
Who is explicitly not an American. Yeah.
Not an American.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All the other characters, Sisko, Janeway, Archer, all of them, they're all Americans.
Absolutely.
Even Michael Burnham, I believe, as well.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. I think so.
Kind of a Vulcan expatriate.
Yeah. Exactly.
But she's kind of got mixed origins. But yeah. So I wanted to ask you about your introduction into Star Trek. Like what was did someone show it to you? Did you find it on your own? Where did you start with it?
I've told this story before and I can never remember exactly when the first time was that I saw it. I suspect it was one of the movies. It was one of the Kirk era movies. Maybe Star Trek II, maybe Star Trek III. I'm not sure. I probably saw it on TV. And what I suspect happened, because again, like I don't have a perfect memory of this, but I was interested in space already. Like I was interested in, like, this was the early and mid 80s. So the space shuttle was a big thing. There was not yet a space station, but there was talk of one, and I just found all of that very exciting. And I had, even as like a little kid, like in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, like I had, read books and watched documentaries and learned about the American space program in the 60s and the astronauts back then. I had watched The Right Stuff when I was way too young to have watched that movie about the Mercury astronauts in the early 60s, and just absolutely fell in love with the real manned space program, specifically the American version. And so when Star Trek, when I first saw Star Trek, like I immediately related it to that. And that's still my favorite part of Star Trek, when I can watch it and view it as kind of a reference to real life space travel. When I can imagine, oh, these people are astronauts. Like that really hits my sweet spot as a Star Trek fan when they do what I call astronaut shit. I love, because you can imagine, oh, they're astronauts. Yes, it's 300, 400 years in the future. Yeah, they're doing things that astronauts today wouldn't do. Yeah, there's aliens, that just so happen to look exactly like humans, just with some stuff glued to their faces. But it's astronauts. They're astronauts. And I really like that part of it. So I think that's what really drew me to it at first. And then I think, I know I was watching TNG from the time that it started. So when TNG started in '87, I was already a Star Trek fan from the movies. And I probably at that point I had seen some of the TOS reruns as well. So when TNG started, I was already kind of there, and I was like 7.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they got me young. They got me early, and soon. And even though those first couple seasons, or especially that first season of TNG, is pretty rough, I don't seem to have cared when I was a kid. Like I was right there with it.
Yeah, it's interesting because we're doing the TNG rewatch right now. We're just like we did with Deep Space Nine. And
Yeah.
we've been going through each episode. We sit down, we talk about it, and for some reason I seem to have rose-colored glasses on about the whole thing, because I'm like, sure, this plot sucks. Sure, this this might be boring, but man, this cast is charismatic. Man.
Oh yeah.
Frakes and Patrick Stewart and all of them, like they're just so likable, and they feel like an old friend. And so even when it's like kind of a boring episode or whatever, and some of the other critiques come through, I'm just like, I don't care. I love it.
Well, I mean, in hindsight, that's one of the things about TNG specifically that I appreciate the most, is because it was given a chance to grow and become a great show. Because you're right. When you watch the first season, even some of those first season episodes are really, really terrible. But I don't think it's ever such a bad show that it's irretrievable. Like there's always, you can always, even when you're watching like a really lousy early TNG episode, you can tell, like, if they figure this out, like the pieces are here for a good show. They just need to figure it out. And eventually they do. And, I would argue that season 2 is a lot better than, I even did a whole video about this recently, that season 2 is a lot better than a lot of fans give it credit for. But then of course season 3 comes along and it really improves.
It's off. It's like goes off into orbit.
Yeah, but it had that chance. It was popular enough that they renewed it after that rough first season, and then it got another one after the second season, and they had enough time to figure it out, and they did. They didn't just keep churning out the same show and saying, well, it's getting ratings, whatever. Like they worked on it and figured it out, and it became a really, really good show. And that, to me, like, as not just a fan, but as a critic, like, that's just a wonderful thing to be able to watch, to be able to see, like, oh, they're getting better. They're figuring it out,
Yeah, me too. Like I'm still really enjoying it. Of course, like some of these, we just did The Measure of a Man.
Oh man, yeah,
and
great episode.
That was so great. And then we do the episode we did on Thursday, which was The Dauphin, which is the episode that comes right after it. Which is the one with Wesley and the girl. And, we're like, man, this took a dip.
The quality, the level of quality in season 2 is all over the place. I mean, it's highs and lows,
which is not that great. Like, there's an amazing scene in that episode with like Whoopi Goldberg and Jonathan Frakes. Where they do that whole flirt thing together.
They're flirting with each other, yeah.
And it's amazing.
It's a great scene.
So I don't know. Like, I'm very forgiving. We went through like all the episodes of Enterprise before we did the TNG podcast, and I was like, man, there were some boring episodes of Enterprise that
oh yeah,
we had to get through too. And that, just like in the same way, they got their chance to kind of find their footing, kind of develop. And then I feel like
Yeah.
the last 2 seasons of Enterprise really benefit because this cast. But there's always like kind of that trope that they had to kind of settle into it before they could really break off.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what would you say? You kind of found it on your own. You're saying, it wasn't like
Yeah.
necessarily your dad saying or your mom saying, "Hey, like I love Star Trek and you should too."
No, I think my mom was a Star Wars fan. And when I started watching Star Trek, like she watched it too, and she became a fan of it as well. And my dad would watch it with us. I don't think he ever became like a dedicated like Star Trek fan. But if I talked to him about it today, I'm sure he would probably remember a lot of stuff about TNG because that's mostly what we watched together. But I sort of came to it on my own. It wasn't like something I inherited from my parents.
And you're watching it all. You're watching it all through that first run, pretty much. Like would you say?
I watched it. I watched it faithfully for the entirety of TNG and Deep Space Nine, and maybe about 4 years into Voyager, and then I started kind of losing interest.
That's right. You've never been a huge Voyager fan.
Yeah, and I would come back to Voyager every now and then just to kind of check in, you know. And the same thing with Enterprise. When Enterprise started, I was right there like every week for maybe the first 2 years, and then my interest started to wane. And it was the same thing. I would kind of check in to see what they were doing, and then I came back for the last episode, and I was like, oh, so that's what they did, you know.
And for me, it was like my parents were big original series people, especially like the movies. And I remember when like it debuted. I'm 3 years younger than you, so I'm 7.
Yeah.
Or no, 4. I'm 4. You're 7.
When TNG,
When
yeah,
it
yeah.
starts. And like I was like, oh, I don't get it. Like it's not like they call it the Next Generation, but like I thought this would be like I thought it'd be like Clue Junior, where it's like the son, of
Right, where it's
Professor
like the
Plum,
children of the
children
original
of, like,
cast, yeah.
Because I was like, what's a generation, Mom? And like trying to explain this whole. And she's like, well, I go, we're one generation, you're the next generation. I was like, okay, so where is like the son of Spock? And where is
Shouldn't it be like Star Trek 2 or 3 generations later? Like, what is this?
Right. And so I wasn't watching week to week for sure. But it would come on like on Entertainment Tonight. I remember Mary Hart, like, and all them would be like, they're killing off Tasha Yar tonight. You won't believe it. And then like John Tesh played a Klingon the next season. So it was definitely in my.
Yeah.
I was definitely aware of it. I was watching it in syndication pretty early, but then all of a sudden my friends got so into it at school, and they loved it, and they made me love it. And then even when Next Gen finishes in 1994. By this point, I'm about 10 or 11.
Yeah.
And my dad even went out of his way to watch the finale, which stunned
Yeah.
me. Like, but there was a couple episodes like Best of Both Worlds that come out in that that he thought were really cool. And
Oh, yeah.
my dad took notice. Then it was really something. In my
Yeah.
mind, 'cause he
Yeah,
watched
TNG
so
was a popular show. Like it's been a long time since Star Trek had a show that was popular with people beyond its dedicated fan base. I think TNG was definitely the high point of that, where even people who weren't watching every week or who wouldn't have described themselves as Trekkies or something similar, at least knew what it was and would even watch it occasionally to kind of keep up with it. And like you could make like a reference to something from TNG, and a large number of people would at least know what you were talking about.
Right.
Whereas nowadays, if you start making like, Strange New Worlds jokes, most people are going to be like, what is that? What are you talking about?
Yeah, even if you were making Deep Space Nine jokes or Voyager jokes.
Oh, yeah.
Unless they were somebody who watched it, but you're right. It kind of like leaked out of sort of like just the science fiction space and got into more of like the general culture, the zeitgeist.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was nominated for Best Drama at the Emmys its final year,
Right.
which I mean, I don't think that'll ever happen to a Star Trek show again. I mean, maybe, but I'm not holding my breath. But I mean,
we had
yeah.
the toys, we had it was on bags of chips. Next Generation,
Yes, absolutely.
At a time when like that was kind of reserved for things like I don't know, maybe sports teams and and different things like that. Like that's how popular it was. So like that's the time I'm growing up in, and you as well. And then what I wanted to ask you was, what is it in particular about Star Trek? Is it just that it's space for you that you love about it the most? you know, is there one thing you love about it, or like I'm guessing there's probably many things, but
It's not just that it's space, because there's lots of shows that take place in space that I couldn't care less about. You know, I'm not like just, I mean, the space thing might be enough to kind of get me to incline my head in its direction, but that by itself isn't enough to keep me interested. So, I mean, that I do think the space connection was a big part of my initial entry as a fan. But I think, I mean, yeah, there's all kinds of things about Star Trek in particular that I love and admire. But I think it boils down to the same thing that keeps me hooked on anything that I'm a fan of, that I keep coming back to, which is I love the stories and I love the characters. You know, I mean, with TNG, like I really liked Captain Picard. I was invested in what was going to happen to him. I really liked Commander Riker. I was invested in what was going to happen to him. And Data and Dr. Crusher and Worf and, you know, Geordi. Like, I liked those characters and I liked spending time with them and I liked following them through their adventures. And then with Deep Space Nine, it was that, but amplified, because I thought their stories were even more compelling and even more well told, and you know were more challenging in ways that TNG stories often weren't. Even though I still absolutely adore TNG, but it was just like a level up, and you could really tell that it was a show that took great pride in its writing and took great pride in its actors and gave its actors opportunities to act, to perform, to create characters. So I think it's that, and it's the same thing. It's not. It's the reason why I'm so dedicated to Star Trek, and why I love it so much, and why I'm always willing to give whatever the new thing is a chance. You know, but it's the same. But that applies to every other kind of movie or TV show or comic book or novel or whatever. Do I care about the characters, and do I care about what happens to them? And when the characters have relationships with each other, do I believe it? Like, does it feel real to me? Like, I think I've told the story before with Deep Space Nine. And it's you know, it's not a great episode of Deep Space Nine. It's the episode Meridian, the Gunga Din episode, or the Brigadoon episode, where
yes.
where Dax falls in love with the guy on the disappearing
Goodwin
planet.
from Lost.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's not a good episode, but there's a moment in that episode where Dax has decided to leave. Like, she's going to go live on this planet with this guy. And intellectually, even the first time you watch the episode, you don't buy this for a second. Like, you know she's going to be back. She's not leaving forever. Like, you know she's going to be back on this ship with everybody else by the end of this episode. But there's a scene where she says goodbye to Cisco. And in that moment, even though you know this isn't going to stick, even though you know this is just like a plot contrivance, in that scene, I believe that these two people love each other and they're friends and they're going to miss each other. That's like the hook. I'm like, everything else aside, you watch that moment, and that's not two actors playing a role in a TV show. You believe it, and you ignore the fact that they're supposed to be on a spaceship. You ignore the fact that they're wearing these funny clothes. You ignore the fact that one of them is supposed to be an alien. It's just two people who are friends, and one of them is leaving, and they're going to miss each other. And if a show can get me to that point where I'm watching it and I'm there and I believe it in my heart, like, that's it. You've got me. And that's what Deep Space Nine did. And that's what pretty much all of the Star Trek shows that I have really, really, really loved have done at one point or another.
Right, because in season 3 of Next Gen, they go from this plot-driven show to a character-driven show, where it's like, okay, this is going to be a Picard episode, this is going to be a Riker episode, and Deep Space Nine pretty much had that model throughout their whole show, where, like, in that particular example, it's a Dax episode.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we're going to focus all on Dax for this episode, and I think that was like what made the Star Trek franchise in the 90s amazing and great, was just this, like, we're going to be character first, and then on top of that, we're going to introduce you some amazing science fiction ideas, right, that are going to be put through that lens. But yeah, at the heart of it, it's really about people and humanity and things like that. You also mentioned that you don't. It didn't matter to you if like a show was set in space so much, even though you kind of started with that whole love of like
Yeah.
NASA and the space program. What would be some examples of shows set in space that you wouldn't care about?
Well, like the Babylon 5 spin-offs. I liked Babylon 5, the original show. I really liked Babylon 5, and it was on kind of concurrent with Deep Space Nine. And because of the way my local TV channels were programmed, usually it would be like a block where they would show you the new episode of Deep Space Nine that week, and right after it would be the new episode of Babylon 5. So I could get like my sci-fi fix, all in one shot. But when they started doing like the spin-offs of Babylon 5, I just wasn't there for that. I don't wish them any harm, but I was just like, no, that's okay. I'm not interested in.
Like what was it called?
Yeah.
Like Excalibur or something.
There was one that was about the Rangers or something. There was one that took place like on a ship. It was like Babylon 5, but on a
I
ship.
think it was called Excalibur, and it was like this whole idea of like this disease. But yeah, I was the same.
Yeah. I just
original
wasn't.
Show was amazing,
Yeah.
but then they made a bunch of movies and things like that.
Yeah, and what else? There was a show on Fox called Space 1999, in that I watched like the first couple episodes of, and it just wasn't for me. I was just like, okay.
What, the
To be
original
honest,
Star-
I mean, I tell you what, I watched the first season of the reboot of Battlestar, the Ron Moore Battlestar, and I thought it was fantastic. And then for whatever reason, I just never watched the rest of it. Like it wasn't even that I didn't like it. I thought it was brilliant, but I just kind of, I need to go back and catch up on it, obviously, because I've heard great things about it. And that first season I thought was fantastic. I just never watched the rest of it.
It gets good.
Yeah.
It starts off really good, but like
Yeah.
it's quite the self-contained story too, which is kind of nice about it.
Yeah.
I don't think they're going to sequelize that show or anything.
Yeah.
So okay, interesting. And just wanted to ask you, do you watch the other like Trek adjacent shows now? Like there's the Orville, for instance.
Oh yeah, I watched the Orville. Apparently they're finally making a new season of it. I think I heard that.
Well, they keep saying there's going to be
They
a new
keep-
fourth
yeah.
season, and then
I don't know.
Seth MacFarlane keeps getting pulled in to do his other things.
Do his other, because he's still doing like 25 different things. No, I like the Orville. I was a little uncertain about it during the first season because it felt like it couldn't decide whether it wanted to be a comedy show or a serious show, and it kind of never fit into either lane. But then I feel like in season 2, it figured it out. And it said, you know what, let's just be like a sci-fi show. And if there's an opportunity to be funny, let's take it, but let's not try to force it. And it kind of settled in. So I thought it got better in season 2. And then season 3 I thought was terrific. I thought season 3 I thought was amazing. So yeah, I like the Orville a lot. Yeah.
Norman agrees that the third season was good. We just finished it
Yeah.
up. We went through all those episodes as well. Even though that third season, like they go from like this 45-minute episode that has to account for commercials to like every episode's like an hour and a half. So
That's my only criticism of season 3. My only criticism of season 3 is I feel like they would have been better served, even though they were doing it for Hulu by that point, so they didn't have that imposed time restriction. But I feel like they would have been better served to stick with that anyway.
some of the episodes, like, they
yeah.
drag, and you're like this.
It's like you can cut about 20 minutes out of this, no problem. And you probably it's like when the Twilight Zone went from half an hour to an hour for that one season, and almost nobody remembers any of those episodes. It's like all of the classic original Twilight Zone episodes are from the 30-minute seasons because that's just the perfect format for that. And for a sci-fi adventure show like Star Trek or the Orville, I mean, I think that's kind of the same thing. It's like just you take it 45 minutes and we're good.
This isn't always meant to be this long, and when it is, you probably need to break it up into a two-parter. In all reality. Oh, the other show I wanted to ask you about, because we're finishing up the Orville here on the channel, and now we're moving on to our Monday night podcast, is going to be For All Mankind, which is Ron Moore's other show. Have you seen any of that?
I have not seen it. I've heard really good things about it. I will check it out at some point, I'm sure, because I mean it's right in my wheelhouse as far as subject matter, and it's Ron Moore, who I'm a big fan of. But no, I haven't seen any of it yet.
Yeah, him and a few of the other D Space Nine writers, David Weddle and a couple others that he brought over. Jeff Russo does all the music on the show.
Yeah,
and of course has done a lot of the different themes. So I really recommend. You got to get to Battlestar and you got to get to For All Mankind.
For All Mankind.
You have homework, sir.
I've got my homework.
If if you're not busy enough. So back to your life. So you,
Yes.
you know, you're watching Star Trek all through high school. Kind of waning off with Voyager, and I get the sense that you decided you wanted to be a writer or some kind of a creator. At some point in your early life.
Yeah.
What was that journey exactly?
Very early on, I probably around age 12 or 13, and oddly enough, it wasn't Star Trek, it was Batman. But
Batman.
Batman, because that was like the twin passion, the twin nerdy kind of passions of my youth were Star Trek and DC Comics, but specifically Batman. When I was I think it was when I was 12, I wrote my own Batman story. And, now we know that that's fan fiction, but I had never heard that term at the time. I didn't know there was a name for it. I didn't know that anybody else did it. I had an idea for a Batman story, and I thought, shit, let me try to write it. And I was 12, and I don't even know if I even have it anymore, if it even still exists anywhere. But I'm sure if I read it today, I would think it was terrible because I was 12 and I'd never really written anything before.
This needs another pass, Mr. Shives.
Exactly. I'd be like, it's just I feel like the scene where Batman and Alfred talk should be later and maybe just tighten it up a bit. But no, but I liked it. Like I enjoyed the process of writing. And what I discovered was basically fanfic is good practice because you have a pre-existing world, you have a pre-existing cast of characters, and you can just sort of, do the literary equivalent of playing with action figures. And you can learn how to, craft a plot, how to write dialogue, how to craft a scene. And then eventually, hopefully, and I think it was the case in my case, you learn to do that not in fanfic. You learn to just write and make up your own stuff. So it's really good training wheels for a writer, and it's just fun. And it's a fun way to engage with characters that you like as a fan and to sort of work out, not just telling stories with them, but work out your understanding of them. My personal take on Batman and the things about him that I think are the most interesting came out through my fanfic writing when I was a teenager. Strangely enough, I never really wrote much Star Trek fanfic. I've written a few pieces here and there, but for whatever reason, like I've never really felt like I had Star Trek stories in my head. I felt like I have not so much anymore, but when I was a teenager, I felt like I had so many Batman stories in my head. But I never really felt like I had Star Trek stories in my head. And even today, like when people, because of my YouTube channel, sometimes people will ask me like, if you created a Star Trek show, what would it be? And like, I don't really have a specific answer, because I just don't feel like I have Star Trek stories in my head. I feel like if Paramount came to me and said, here's a whole bunch of money, create a Star Trek show, like I'm sure I would come up with something.
Yeah, I think of something, but you would rather be asked to make a Batman show, it sounds like.
Weirdly enough, yes. Yeah. I mean, I feel like if DC Comics said, hey, we've been watching your YouTube channel and we've decided to hire you to write a Batman book.
We noticed that Batman figure in the background. We think
exactly. We thought this random guy on YouTube might have something to contribute.
He understands Batman.
I feel like I would be that would be a much smoother, like I feel like I could dive into that a lot quicker than I could Star Trek. Like my idea for a Star Trek series is basically just a vague concept, and like I have no idea what any particular stories would be, or who the characters would be. Like it's very unformed and, probably always will be. But with Batman or even Superman at this point, I could be like, oh yeah, I know what to do with this,
Did you see the new trailer for the...
Oh man, the Superman one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh boy. Oh man. My Silver Age Superman is coming to life. I love it. I love seeing the robots. I was like, he's doing the robots.
He's doing the robot. He's doing the dog. We already knew, but
the dog we saw. Yeah. Oh, it looks so good. I mean, it's just a trailer. We have no idea what the movie's going to be, but it made me look forward to the movie more, and I was already looking forward to it. So yeah.
Me too. So you write this thing when you're 12 or 13, and
yes,
you get some positive feedback from it. Is that?
Yeah, actually, I started turning them in as English assignments. I was incredibly fortunate in middle school that my middle school had just started at the time, I think it was a pilot program to allow like 7th and 8th graders to do creative writing for English class, and that was and it was called Writing Workshop. And it wasn't, they still taught us like grammar and sort of traditional English class stuff, but they also blocked out significant amounts of time for us to write and to write whatever we wanted. And they were like, the teacher would put up, she and he, my 7th grade teacher was a woman, Mrs. Daniels, and my 8th grade teacher was a man, Mr. Cromwell, but they both kind of did the same thing. And the teacher would put prompts up on the board, like 3 or 4 prompts, and say, you can write about one of these, or you can write about anything else. So more often than not, I would write like a Batman story because it was creative writing and you could do whatever you want. And so that's what I did. And, I was incredibly fortunate to be in that situation because not every 7th and 8th grader in the United States at the time was allowed to do creative writing in school, like for a grade.
I was ever offered that chance to do that.
No, it was, and in a large sense, it set the course of my life. Like, even though I never became a professional writer, like I still think of myself as a writer, and writing is a huge part of what I do now on my YouTube channel, and still, a major part of my self image and, who I think of it's because of that.
I would say like all of your videos about Star Trek, I think come almost from that perspective of a writer or someone looking at it through that lens. Like, what's the story?
I think so, yeah.
And
yeah.
Of course, character from there, but.
Yeah, and I always say that's the most important thing. Like, that's why I kind of, when I do occasionally scrape up against the fans who are more interested in like, canon type stuff or lore type stuff, it's usually because of that. Because when push comes to shove, I care about the story.
Right.
And if the story contradicts something previously established, I honestly don't care, as long as it's a good story. And other fans are more sort of sticklers for, well, but they got this wrong and they got this wrong and this contradicts that. And that's fine if that's the way you want to, watch it.
Well,
but that's just, I just don't
I
care.
I'm somewhere in between those two philosophies where I think if something makes sense, but then on the other hand, it feels like sometimes writers don't do their homework enough.
Oh, sure. And yeah, and and it is definitely. And I react to that sometimes too. Like if it feels like something is quote unquote wrong based on previously established stuff because the writer just didn't do their homework, to me, that's a little different than, this writer has made a creative choice to serve their story first. I always respect that.
I think one example for me would be in Star Trek Picard. I guess it's the season 2 arc, right? And so they had established some things about Picard and his parents, but they obviously chose to write this whole other story in season 2 of Picard where his father's abusive, or more abusive than we thought he already was, and then his mother had committed suicide. Spoilers for season 2 of Picard. And but then we saw her as an old lady in that episode with I think it's with Q. Is it in?
Or is it's one of the ones where they're like hallucinating stuff.
Oh, where no one has gone before, I think.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, where they're and he sees like his mother in the hallway with the tea or something. Yeah.
Yeah, so they have to write this line in Picard where he's like, and I used to imagine her as an old lady drinking tea, even though she never was. And then it's like... I wish they would have just left that out. I wish they would have just not had Picard say, I used to imagine her as an old, because then you're reminding people of it. You're saying, it's like, it feels like, we have to fix this because this is different from, it's like, just let it go. Just let it go. Just tell the story you want to tell. Right. But coming back I care about these characters. I care about their history. I care about where they came from and where they're going. So sometimes I'm just, as a fan, I'm like, I guess they decided they wanted to have this choice. Like, okay, like Picard's mother committed suicide. We want that to be part of this story, right?
Sure.
We think that's going to be important to his trauma. So I think just trying to, like, for me, I was like, well, where's his brother? Why isn't his brother in this story? We know his brother's important, so what, Picard feels like an only child in some of these flashbacks.
Yeah.
And I guess just you can. I feel like you can. It's not that I want to be a stickler. It's more that I'm just
Sure.
want to see them honor what's already been established.
I guess, I mean, I see what you're saying. And again, to me, it comes down to if season 2 of Picard had been better, like I probably wouldn't have. It's not just that I wouldn't have cared about that stuff. The first watch, I probably wouldn't even have noticed. I would have been so engrossed in the characters and the story and in what was happening on my screen right now that I wouldn't even have cared. I wouldn't have even have thought, wait a minute, didn't we see Picard's mom as an old lady? Wait a minute, was Picard's dad really that bad? Wait a minute, where's Picard's brother? Wait a minute. The thing that I noticed, even more than all of that stuff, is this idea that they kind of invented for season 2, that Picard, like, was this lonely man his entire life, and he never had love, and he never believed he was worthy of love. And I'm like, where did this come from?
Yeah, me too.
It's like he's always been surrounded by like friends and lovers. He's had so many girlfriends we just saw on the movies and the TV show. He doesn't seem like he seems on TNG, he seems like he kind of sets himself apart from the crew because he's the captain, but you never get the sense that he's like socially isolated and lonely.
The measure
but-
of Man,
and
we just watched it. Like,
Yeah.
the JAG officer in that episode, she's an old girlfriend. And
Yeah.
he's got a great thing going.
He's obviously had relationships, both, romantic and friendship, like with lots of people throughout his life. So this notion that they introduce in season 2 of like, oh, he's so lonely because because of what happened to his mom when he was a child, and he doesn't believe he's worthy of love. I'm like, again, if it had been a good show,
We wouldn't care.
I wouldn't care. I'll be like, you know what? They're going with this. This is the version of Picard they've decided to present for this show. It's not the same as what we saw before, but it's good. I don't care. What made it what it was for me was they make all these changes. They introduce all of these new sort of characterizations for a really, really, really lousy show, you know?
Well, let me ask you about this example, a better show, which is, I would say, Strange New Worlds, for instance, right? And I think that show is really good, and I enjoy it a lot. And as a fan of the original series, not a huge fan. I'm not like, it's not my number one Star Trek, but I'm watching some of these depictions. This is a prequel show. And we're seeing a younger version of Spock and Pike, and in particular Nurse Chapel, who I think the depiction we get in Strange New Worlds, which is a great character, and I love the way Jess Bush plays her, and the writer in a sense. But on the other hand, I'm like, how is this person going to become Majel Barrett's version of Nurse Chapel later? It feels like a huge disconnect. And I was talking with Chris Murphy the other night and a few others where they were just like, doesn't matter. That was like an old contrived, like that show for some people has not aged well. All they can see is like that 1950s, 1960s mindset of where women are placed and how they're important.
And her sort of like forlorn pining for Spock and, oh, Mr. Spock. Yeah.
And so that this needs a major update is another school of thought, like that. That the original version of Nurse Chapel and Uhura and some of the other female characters, very boring and very one-dimensional, and therefore we need to make them more exciting. And I respect that, but then I'm like, but you're telling me that this Chapel is the same person as that, right?
Right.
If it was like a multiverse kind of a thing, if you said this is a brand new version, if it's like the Kelvin universe, I think as a fan, I personally go, okay, like that's easy. Like this is a new dimension, it's a new version. But when you specifically try to connect them, and I don't think I'm the only fan like this, but then Steve, get over yourself, and
well, no, to me, like if somebody needs to sort of imagine for themselves and have like a headcanon of, well, this is a different universe, in order for it to make sense. If that's what they need to do to enjoy the show, then okay, that's fine. To me, I don't need to do that because to me, the fact that I am aware that it's a work of fiction is enough for me, and again, to take it back to Batman, like I came of age in the 90s when we went from Michael Keaton Batman to Val Kilmer, may he rest in peace, Batman, to George Clooney Batman, who were all supposed to be the same Batman.
True. They all have the same Commissioner Gordon.
They have the same Commissioner Gordon. They have the same Alfred. That's really about the only thing that's the same
Yeah,
from movie
even
to
like
movie.
the mansion changes.
The mansion changes. The look of Gotham City changes radically from Batman to Batman Returns, and those two are made by the same director. I mean, Batman Returns, Tim Burton is like, I'm Tim Burtoning this thing.
Yeah.
I don't care what,
They
But
built
yeah,
so
so
many statues since the last.
so many, yeah, it's like, and so there's a huge variation in terms of tone, in terms of characterization, in terms of style between all of those movies, but they're all supposed to be in the same world, and the characters are all supposed to be literally the same people. They're so different that now, because of this multiverse kind of mindset, there are some fans of those movies that have insisted for themselves that they actually take place in different universes, even though nothing in the movies indicates that at all. And in fact, there are little touches of continuity between each movie to kind of, imply that yes, this is still the same guy. Like this is still supposed to be the same Batman. But anyway, I was like, okay, it's a different story, it's a different actor, it's a different director. I'm fine with this. And with Star Trek, it's the same thing. Like, yeah, Nurse Chapel is basically a completely different person in Strange New Worlds as we see her in classic Trek. And it's only supposed to be like a few years before. I'm fine with that.
And I hear you, and I think
yeah.
Your voice on these issues. I think sometimes I need to hear it as well, just as because I'm like, yeah, get over yourself, Dave, and like move beyond these things and stop. Because I am such a person that has attention to detail as a strength of mine. But on the other hand, sometimes you got to let it go. I like in First Contact, for instance, where Picard is wearing that TNG uniform when he's in like the alcove, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
They could have said, "Who cares? Just put him in the uniform we're wearing in this movie," But
But see what I've enjoyed about Strange New Worlds is they do that, but they do their version of that. They do it in a way that fits the aesthetic and the tone of their show, right? Because like in the first season finale, when Pike meets the future version of himself from like an alternate future where he didn't get in the chair, and he's wearing like a monster maroon uniform.
Yeah.
Now it doesn't look exactly like the ones from the TOS movies, but it's that style. It's translated to fit the aesthetic of the show. So it's like, okay, it doesn't look exactly the same, but it's like this show's version of that. And they do that like I love the Enterprise sets on Strange New Worlds, because even though they look a lot different from TOS, you can tell that they are referenced to the TOS sets. Like there are little details, like the red gratings in the crew quarters, those like little dividers that are like a red kind of fence sort of thing. Those are there. They're different, but it's obviously a reference to that other thing. The color schemes, things like that. It's obvious that it's not. It's a show that's obviously made by people who did do their homework, who do know about stuff from the previous shows, and are incorporating it to create a kind of continuity, but in their show's unique style. And I appreciate that. Like I wouldn't expect it to look, I mean, like as much as I have enjoyed some of the fan film series based on Star Trek, like, Star Trek Phase 2 and Star Trek Continues, that did go out of their way to make it look as much like an episode of classic Trek as they possibly could. I mean, I appreciate that, and I admire the sort of workmanship that goes into something like that. But I mean, would I really want to see an entire show, produced by a network for, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars an episode that was that? I don't think so. Like, I'd want to see what a new generation of artists and directors and writers and storytellers and set designers would have to do, And I think for the most part, that's what Strange New Worlds does. And that's one of the things I really like about it.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's, and then there's that part of me that feels like we're pushing out the old, or maybe it just needs an update. Maybe a retcon is a good thing. I think you did a whole video a few years ago about retconning and this whole idea that it's always looked this way. What are you talking about? It's just don't even think about it too hard, because I think with the '60s version, it's always been tough. Even going back to when I was a kid, people go, "Oh, these special effects. Oh, this dated sort of mindset." But on the other hand, there's so much good stuff in that original series that I love, and I hate to throw out everything from it. It's not just the performances, but even some of the aesthetics, things like the uniforms, and I don't know. just the sound effects, and there's these kinds of things that I, I I would hate to lose. You know, I know it's not going to be erased from existence, but on the other
Yeah.
hand, it kind of feels like that too. So
Yeah, that's. I mean, I sort of. To me, that show is that show, and like for classic Trek with like the sound effects and the aesthetics, like to me, we're not losing it because it's there. Like it's that show and it exists and I love it and I'm glad that we have it, but I don't feel like anybody who comes in to make another Star Trek show is bound to keep doing it that way. I feel like they should have the creative liberty to do it their way. Now, if somebody comes in and says, "I have an idea for a Star Trek show, and I want it to look, exactly like classic Trek," well, I think they should have the right to do that too. I think the creators of the show should be allowed to make the show they want to make. But I don't think there shouldn't be any expectation or any sort of imposition of, okay, if you're going to do a Star Trek show and it's going to be set during this time period that we previously saw in this other show, then you have to make your show look exactly like that. I don't think that's fair to the creator, and I'm personally as a fan not necessarily interested in that. Yeah.
Shut up, nerds. It's okay. It's gonna be all right.
Shut up, nerds. Exactly.
Okay. Well, that was a great conversation, and thanks for jumping into all that. I wanted to
Yeah.
segue back to your story.
Okay.
And so so you have this interest in writing. Have you always been as strong of a public speaker? Is that something you've always been into, or did that something that evolved?
I think I've always been a ham, and I think that's a big part of it. I think that's a big part of me, going on camera and like, doing what I do in my YouTube channel. That comes from the fact that I'm just a ham. And, whenever we had to give like speeches in front of class in school, it was always a kind of thing where like I was always incredibly nervous before having to do it. But then once I got up there and once I got into it, I had the time of my life. So there's always been that, where like I never necessarily sought it out. Like I never thought to myself, like I want to have a job someday where I'm talking to people.
Yeah, you were like, I'm going to be on the radio one day. That was never necessarily your...
No, not really. Not really. I mean, again, like there were times when I would sort of muse about like being involved in some kind of entertainment, but it was always like as a writer. It was always like, maybe I'll be a screenwriter. Maybe I'll do it was always like a behind the scenes kind of thing. I never really saw myself as like an in front of the camera person. Yeah. That really started with the YouTube channel. Like I made a YouTube video and I enjoyed it and I liked it. And I thought I might be able to get good at this.
Because so like I just looking at that because you create your channel on December 21st, 2010.
Yeah.
And so I'm guessing you finished up high school at the end of the 90s, roughly.
98. Yeah. Class of 98.
And so what's in between you becoming a YouTuber and the end of high school? Just high level.
So after high school, I kind of bummed around for a little bit, and then eventually I got a job. I got the only proper job of my entire life. I got a job working maintenance at a truck stop, where I worked for 5 years. And then after that, so I'm like, I was 25 when I left that job because I got that job when I was 20, and then I left when I was 25, and then I went to college, and I went to college for 4 years, and then it was during my time in college that I started doing the YouTube channel. And by the time I was done with college, the YouTube channel was successful enough that I could start thinking about it as a job. And plus, at the time, I was married and my wife had a good job and was able to sort of be the breadwinner and was patient enough with me to allow me to kind of chase this, YouTube thing. And eventually, fortunately, it took off and became an actual job that, allowed me to earn a living. And now here I am, no longer married. The marriage didn't last, but the YouTube channel is going stronger than ever. But so that's basically the Cliff's Notes version of how I got here.
So your very first video is called "So Let's Try This Again." Is that
Yes, well, yes, because my current YouTube channel is actually my second channel.
okay?
I had a channel before that. That I think I ran afoul of a copyright thing. Like I read somebody's poetry without permission, and they
Oh,
had a really bad attitude about it, and they were like, "No, you can't do that." So I actually got that channel suspended. So I started a new channel, and that was the first video on that. And then I think I just started re-uploading stuff from the previous channel. But no, but the first YouTube video I ever made, period, was it was an atheist related video, because before I was known as a Star Trek YouTuber, I was known as an atheist YouTuber, and an atheism related video. It was in response to a Christian YouTuber had put up a video called, I think it was called 5 Questions for Atheists, and I felt like it was actually in good faith. Like it wasn't just trying to start an argument or trying to do like a gotcha kind of thing. It felt like an honest, seeking of like an exchange of a conversation with people who had a different viewpoint. So I said, okay, I'll do this. And I made a video where I answered the 5 questions. And that was the one where I was like, I like this. Like I like talking in front of a camera. I think I might be able to do something with this.
okay, wow. And so you start off with this atheist thing. I see, like in your early days, you're doing, I don't know, wrestling and
Yeah, that's always been a monkey on my back. Wrestling has always been a monkey on my back. I can't get rid of it.
yeah.
I was watching wrestling right before we came online to do this, actually, this morning. Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out exactly when Star Trek becomes part of your content. It seems like it's late.
I mean, it's been a long time now, but yeah, I'd been doing YouTube for several years. I think this first Star Trek video I did that actually was successful enough that made me think, oh, I should do more Star Trek videos, was the Captain Jellicoe one. Is Captain Jellicoe? Captain Jellicoe is actually pretty awesome. That became the first video in my Trek Actually series, which has been a big part of my bread and butter for a long time now. Because for whatever reason, that video for me at least, I mean, it didn't go viral or anything, but for me at least, it caught on and got a lot of views. And my ears kind of perked up and I went, oh, I could talk about Star Trek.
That was the video I discovered you on.
Yeah.
Originally, we've talked about that before.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was like I always hated Jellicoe, and then you presented this like sort of alternative way of looking at him. I'm like, maybe Riker's the dick. I don't know. And
which was fun. Which was fun for me because I think, as I even say in that video, like I love Riker. Like Riker is one of my favorite characters in the entire franchise. But yeah, when I watched that episode, I'm thinking, I don't know. I kind of side with Jellicoe on this. Like they're in like a really, stressful situation here. And I feel like Riker just needs to shut up and listen to Jellicoe here,
Right. And, and not tell him, hey, this is the way we do things around here.
It's not fun anymore.
Yeah. Picard
And he's like, dude, the Cardassians are going to start a war and kill us. Yeah, but nobody's having fun.
Yeah, you're not a nice boss, just so you know. We had a cool boss before. You're not so cool.
I miss the cool boss. I miss Captain Picard, the cool boss.
Right. And did that idea just come to you one day? Or did you watch the episode and say, you know what? I think I have a different take on this.
That's always been one of my favorite TNG episodes. That and Chain of Command. That and Tapestry have always kind of been boxing each other as my favorite TNG episodes. And I've always liked Captain Jellicoe. Like I've always liked him as a character, and I always thought he was a really, really interesting character to kind of take a guy like that and kind of throw him into the Enterprise and sort of cause a little bit of chaos and throw the crew off of their, throw the crew out of their comfort zone. At the same time as you have Captain Picard, like in the other story, literally being tortured. It's a really, really good story and a really good balance of those two things. And yeah, I think I noticed, in Star Trek fandom online that there was a lot of kind of negative attitude toward Jellicoe. because he was, he was the antagonist, like for that part of the story. He was the guy who came in and he was doing all the stuff that Captain Picard didn't do. And, the episode does things to make us not like him. Like when he says, get that fish out of the ready room, like they have him doing things to disrespect Captain Picard to get us as the audience to not like him.
Troy, put on a uniform.
Yeah, put on some clothes, Deanna Troy, and that you lose the fan base, right? You lose the male part of the fan base right there. But at the same time, like, they don't make him an outright villain.
No.
A lot of what he does is shown to be reasonable and to make sense. And even he and Riker kind of reach an understanding, even though it's grudging. Like Jellicoe has to kind of bite his lip when he goes, but he does go back. He does when Geordi says, if you want this mission to succeed, you should get Commander Riker to do it. And to his credit, that's what Jellicoe does. And he puts his hat in his hand and he goes to Riker, his junior officer, and he says, will you please do this? Because he knows that's what has to happen for the mission to succeed. And Riker gets that amazing shit-eating grin on his face. and he says, yes. And it's a great episode.
Jellicoe suffers from this, like, as a character. Like, once you come into a show like Next Generation, where like you have this main cast and they're almost like a family, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the Picard, Riker, Worf, all of them, and they care about each other much more than they care about anybody else, including the other members of the Enterprise crew. Like if somebody with one of them dies, there's a huge funeral. But if a red shirt dies, sort of an extra, whatever. And when Jellicoe comes into that show, Riker's like, Picard has been captured. Picard is, being tortured. And Jellicoe's priority is not that. Jellicoe's priority is sort of these other things. That's, I think, the main conflict in that two-parter with Jellicoe.
Yeah, and it's a little dose of reality for the Enterprise crew, because you're right. Like, of course, they care about Captain Picard. He's Captain Picard. And we, as the audience, care about Captain Picard because he's our hero. He's the lead of the show. And we know what's going on because we see the Captain Picard part of the episode. And we're like, yeah, go get him out of there.
Save him.
He's not having fun. He's doing really bad. But from Jellicoe's perspective, it's like, do you really want me to risk a war for one guy? Like, that doesn't make sense.
Right. He cares about the mission.
He cares about the mission, and so you can see both sides, but it's done in a really smart way where Jellicoe is the antagonist, but he's not a villain, and it shakes up the status quo, albeit temporarily, but it shakes up the status quo in a way that TNG rarely ever did. I mean, they would only usually do it for maybe one episode at a time. Like, they shake up the status quo by, Picard has been kidnapped by the Borg, but then he comes right back. Or, Worf has left to join the Klingon Civil War, but he comes right back. And with Jellicoe and Picard, it's the same thing. But, you see more of the disruption because Jellicoe is there for so long, and they set it up as though it's going to be a permanent thing, even though it's not.
Even though Riker has that line in the episode, like, they usually don't do the ceremony it's just
right.
a temporary assignment. But there's that. What's interesting to me too is like, seasons earlier, the best of both worlds, where there's this whole arc with Riker and him having, he's been offered command of his own ship so many times. He's been offered this captaincy so many times. When Picard gets assimilated, he puts on the 4 pips. He becomes the captain, and he's the guy who saves Earth and he saves the Federation from the Borg. Really. With the help, and Data and the rest of the crew. But he's the guy.
But he's the captain,
Years later, when this chain of command thing comes up, and the Admiral Nechayev there says, Riker, you're not the best. You don't have the Cardassian experience, so we're going to bring in this other guy, And I get that that's probably what could happen and would happen, but it just feels like such a slight to Riker because he's like, I've been waiting to be given that captain's chair of the Enterprise the whole time, and you're going to bring in Ronnie Cox. Come on.
You're going to bring in the guy from RoboCop? What are you doing?
Not right. Not right.
Well, I did, that's one of the things, like, I think I've even talked about this in videos on my channel in the past. Like, if we're going to be real sticklers for realism here, none of those senior officers on the Enterprise would still be there by season 7 of TNG, let alone the last movie, where like they're all still in the same jobs that they've
Same
had
rank.
for like, yeah, it's like, no, I mean, Riker would be a captain, Data would be a captain, Geordi would be a captain, like Worf would be like with their experience and the missions we've seen them on where they've saved the world, they've saved the galaxy multiple times. Like, there's no way that Geordi would still be the chief engineer of a ship. He would be a captain. All of them would have been, promoted and given their own ships. That's just the way it works. But, it's a show and it's, you don't want, I mean, they kind of try to address it with Riker, at the end of Best of Both Worlds when he basically says, hey, my career is my own business. And that's kind of like our subtle little cue to, okay, just don't worry about it. Riker's just going to stay here. We know it doesn't really make sense, but Riker's just going to stay here. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, we want these, Ensign Kim as the other, example where we can't be.
Poor Harry. It's like, okay, I mean, it's like, can we leave it? Okay, it's you're stuck on the other side of the galaxy. Leave him in the same job. I get it, but give the dude a promotion at least. Like, make him a lieutenant or something.
Promote Tom Paris, demote him, even though he's been court-martialed. Tom Paris, he's been thrown out of Starfleet, and then he's been given this new commission to be on Voyager, and then he's demoted to ensign, then re-promoted to lieutenant again.
And Harry's just standing over there the whole time, like, I'm so happy for him.
Exactly. Okay, how you doing for time?
I'm fine. We can keep going. Yeah.
Okay, great. So wanted to ask you, maybe we go back to politics and
Okay.
Everything you've been doing there. So I wanted to ask you, what's it like being a thought leader, a strong voice on this side? You have a very large following that continues to grow. I saw you went past the whole 300,000 subscribers not too long ago, right?
I did.
And so, what's that been like for you? As you come down from your mountain to talk to all of us.
I mean, the thing is, like, all I ever try to do is give thoughts from my perspective. And, like I said, when we talked about this before, to me, I feel like the usefulness of it is hopefully other people hear what I have to say and that helps them figure out what they think or helps them realize something that maybe they didn't think of or puts their own thinking off in a direction that maybe it just needed a little push to get to, or inspires them, like if you're a person who is, a progressive, someone more to the left politically, and things aren't necessarily going very good for us at the moment, or, could potentially not be going good for us in the future. Sometimes it helps to hear someone on your side, not in a rosy, rose-colored glasses, like everything's actually great kind of way, in a realistic, pragmatic way, but just to say, hey, this isn't over yet. The world hasn't come to an end. History runs in cycles and we can still climb out of this. Like, all is not lost. We have to fight. We have to work. It's not all going to fix itself, but this is not a permanent condition. The good times don't last, but neither do the bad times. And sometimes that can help,
It does. It does.
And also it's good just for me as a writer and as a presenter, I guess, on YouTube. It has given me encouragement to write a lot more satire because it's like, why the hell not? But then the challenge is, how do you make the satire more ridiculous than what's actually happening?
Like your video, like if Republicans said the quiet parts out loud. And...
Yeah. Those, I haven't done any of those since the election. I'm not sure if and when I'll do those again, but writing some of those was kind of a challenge because I was like, how can I have this guy? Because the character I'm playing is basically the embodiment of the Republican Party, and he's saying the things that they would say if they didn't, have to worry about, the media or getting people to vote for them or being whatever. Like, he's just saying he's like their id unleashed. But the Republican Party in real life is kind of its own id unleashed. So it's like, how do you say things that they're not already saying? And that was sometimes a challenge.
It feels like they've really stopped caring on that side
Yeah.
of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Recently, more on the American side. I don't feel like I don't know. I might get in trouble with some of my fellow Canadians here, but the Canadian right doesn't feel quite as extreme in comparison. But I can hear my other friends saying,
Yeah.
no, they're just as bad. They're just as in with the billionaires, and it's just on maybe a smaller scale. Maybe we do it with a little bit more tact up here, but.
I think that's it, because I hear that from people in the UK as well, that like as horrible as their conservative party is, it doesn't seem as radical as the Republicans in the United States do. And I think the main difference is just it's with Republicans now, the mask is almost completely off.
Yeah.
Like you said before, like they just don't care. And that was one of the challenging things about writing those videos, those Republicans say the quiet parts loud videos, because one of the things I tried to do with that character was he showed open, dripping contempt for his audience. You know, he was always supposedly talking to a supportive audience. He was always supposedly talking to like a group of people who would be voting Republican, and I tried to make it as clear as I could that he absolutely hated them and had nothing but contempt in his heart for them. And so I would always find reasons for him, like to insult them, to demean them, to talk about how much lower they were than him. And again, like there are times when, like, I mean, there are times that Donald Trump said during campaign speeches, just vote for me. Like he literally said, just vote for me. Yeah. And that's not that far off from what I'm doing and trying to be satirical. So it's, yeah,
Right.
but I think that's the big
the way
difference.
A lot of voters on the right feel that they feel like the left looks down upon them, hates them, sort of I don't know, diminishes them, and but it's quite the opposite. Is to your point, where
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think I think a lot of voters on the right, they have a really bad reaction when they feel like they are being that when a person on the left talks about, like for instance, talks about the United States having a history of racism, or white people as a group benefiting from racist institutions while people of color have been disadvantaged. There are a lot of people on the right who take that personally and react in a really sensitive way to that and feel as though they personally are being accused of being intentionally racist. And they have a really reflexive negative reaction to that, and they feel like they as individuals are being judged. And who are you to tell me that I'm racist? And who are you to, I've had problems in my life too, and you don't understand. And it's like, okay, nobody's talking about you as an individual. They're talking about just the historical sociological fact that people who look like me have, on average, had it better than people who are black or Hispanic, or, people who have my gender or my sexuality have had it better than people who are gay or trans or whatever. Like, that's just a fact. It doesn't mean that anybody's saying that I am automatically a terrible person. It just means that I have benefited from systems that advantage people like me and disadvantage people who aren't like me. And, you can make it worse on yourself as an individual if you get really defensive about it and you say, oh, well, fuck me, well, fuck you too. Like, that's, you can make it worse. But that's usually what I see people on the right reacting to from people on the left. There are some. Yeah,
it's like this instinct. It's an interesting human condition because
it is.
I've had that same feeling.
Absolutely.
It'd be like if somebody says, "Oh, all men are this way," or men treat women badly, or white people. Or even here in Canada, when we were having our 150th Canadian anniversary, like of Canada Day and Confederation, a lot of like the natives were like, "Hey, screw you guys! You took over our land, and maybe this shouldn't be as jubilant as you think you are." And I think having that, it's kind of a downer, but on the other hand, they're completely right. And so just being being willing to honor the history and understand where you came from and why that's important, I think it's something that's it's much harder to explain to people than you think it would be, you know. And it comes to
Oh
stuff
yeah.
online.
Oh yeah.
So that's tough.
Yeah, it is. And that's the thing is like a lot of these issues do not have easy solutions. But the solution is never to do nothing. And I think with a lot, especially with like social issues like racism or sexism or, you know, discrimination against people because of their sexual orientation or their gender identity or, you know, discrimination against immigrants or people of religious minorities or whatever it is, you know, people with disabilities, etc. The solution on the right, for the most part, seems to be just don't do anything. Just forget it. Just ignore it. Just act like those people don't exist.
Right.
And, you know, and that's not,
I don't see
yeah,
this.
that seems to be the conservative answer to racism is, well, just stop talking about it.
And it will go away.
I don't think that's going to work. Yeah. It's like that. And, but you know, and I think a lot of the time that's where that resentment comes from. That suggestion of you should do something. You know, there is a problem and you should change something about yourself to help us solve this problem. And a lot of people react really, really negatively just to the suggestion of that. You know, like maybe you should look inward. Maybe you should, you know, question your own beliefs or your own assumptions. Maybe there is something, not in a blame kind of way, not in a you're a bad person, but just, you know, you were brought up in a certain culture, you were brought up in a certain context, your experiences are what they are. Maybe you have some biases, maybe you have some prejudices, maybe you have some assumptions that are based on wrong information or whatever. And you should be willing to look at that honestly and say, maybe there is something I could do differently with my life. Maybe I could change my approach to things. Maybe I should adjust my thinking or whatever. And, you know, some people react very, very badly to that.
But that's such a Star Trek way of thinking about things, right? Like,
Yeah.
We see many times in the Next Generation and in the other Star Trek shows where a character's preconceived notions were completely, you know, upended and flipped on their head. And, you know, where Picard has that realization in The Measure of a Man, where he's like, well, we're talking about slavery.
Yeah. Yeah.
Too low. My wife keeps texting me that my microphone's too low. Hold on. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. I can hear you, but you are a little low. Yeah.
I'm using the Murphy microphone.
Well, but yeah, one of my you mentioned Picard realizing that the issue is slavery in Measure of a Man. There's an earlier scene in that episode that I brought out in my I think my most recent review of it, where it's the scene where Picard is talking to Data right after like Maddox has said, "I'm going to take your robot apart." And Data has said, you know, I don't want to do that. And they have that meeting between Picard and Data in the ready room, where at the start of that conversation, Picard, albeit reluctantly, seems ready to turn Data over.
Yeah.
You know, he says, I have to consider Starfleet's interests. You know, and if Starfleet could gain something from Maddox figuring out how to make more of you, I need to take that into consideration. And it's only when Data points out to him that you would never let this happen with any other member of the crew that it clicks in Picard's head and he goes, oh my God.
Well, he actually kicks
right.
Data. He's like, that will be all, Mr. Data. Then he kind of like goes into a little bit of a depression there. And then he kind of gets up and goes, maybe I'm wrong. And then eventually, the conversation with Guinan later on after, you know, Riker's argument was devastating and we couldn't handle it. And then she's like, well, you know, I'm sure that his value will go up now. And he's like, what do you mean by that? What value are you talking about? Yeah, I would just think about how valuable he'll be. You won't have to think about what he feels or thinks or does. You can just throw him out there. Disposable people, right? And I think that's important. You know, I think that that's the kind of storytelling, that's the kind of character development that I think makes Star Trek so great and makes it so relevant for people who think in this way. And I hope that mindset continues to grow and evolve.
I hope so too. I wish that more Star Trek fans took that from Star Trek. I wish that more people watched the show and realized, oh, if Captain Picard can be wrong about stuff and change his mind, maybe I can too, you know?
Okay, am I loud now? Whoa, Dave, had to turn down the volume.
You're louder. But
I'm
I think it might just be because people had you turned up because you were low. I mean,
okay. I keep trying to adjust.
Once I adjusted my volume, you were fine. But
Okay. Okay. Sorry about that. Sorry about the technical difficulties. Wanted to ask you, which voices on the left, if any, do you listen to, follow on YouTube or anywhere else? Like NPR, maybe? Is there where do you get your content?
for news and for just what's going on in the world, I listen to NPR a lot. As far as like commentators on the left, really not very many. Most of the commentary and sort of opinion that I make an effort to listen to comes from comedians, comes from I love Cody Johnston on Some More News. I almost never miss one of those. I don't agree with him 100% of the time. I think he's a little bit more further over toward the anarchist side than I am. But generally speaking, I think, I value his, sense of humor and the issues he brings out and the points he makes. But yeah, like I've never really, for a while I was listening to Keith Olbermann's podcast, and then I had to stop because he was complaining about his ex-girlfriends too much.
Yeah.
And I was like, dude, you're like 60 something years old. I don't want to hear about your ex-girlfriends. Just,
There's that. He has some other ideas that I don't necessarily agree with.
Yeah, Keith kind of, it's like, all right, Keith, what are you doing?
For me, it's been like Brian Tyler Cohen and and Kyle Kalinske from Secular Talk. I don't know if you're familiar with any of them. But
Yes. Oh, and Jesse Dollimore is another one that I listen to.
Okay, I'm not familiar.
And I guest hosted on his channel last year.
But you all do is you're just consistent with your message, right? And you're just on point, and that means everything. You look at Bernie Sanders, who I think is an American politician I have a lot of admiration for, and he's just always consistent. He's always on message. He knows exactly what he's about. He doesn't worry about other political considerations in the same way that maybe other politicians are. And and I'm like, why can't Steve be president of the United States? Why?
Oh God.
Or at least in the cabinet, and like
I would be issuing executive orders about like baseball. I would be doing like.
Well, that was another question I wanted to ask you. What is your what's your spare time? What's your life outside of YouTube? Outside of whatever. What are your hobbies? Do you play softball in the summer? Do you like to travel, bike?
I don't play softball. I do like to exercise. I do when the weather is nice. I do like to go for walks, to get my steps in, to to get my heart points. I have a fitness app. I'm 45 now, so I have a fitness app where you have to get so many heart points a day so you don't drop over. So I work out and try to stay in shape, and like when the weather's not permitting, I have an exercise bike that I do, for an hour a day. And if it's a nice day, I like to go. I'm fortunate that there's a really nice park around here that I can go for a walk in. And other than that, I mean, I try to keep up with movies. I watch probably about half a dozen movies a week.
Half dozen?
Half dozen usually every week, maybe every 2 weeks, as I have time, because I'm pretty busy with YouTube stuff, and but and also sometimes there are some days where I'm like, there's a new movie out that I should watch, but I just don't feel like it, and it's that kind of thing. Because one of my other things that I do in addition to my YouTube channel is I'm a co-host on a couple of podcasts with my best friend Jason Harding, and one of them is a movie review show, Late Seating, and we have a pre-show version of that for people who are patrons of the podcast. And for most of that, it's just me and Jason talking about movies that we've watched since the last time we did a show. So I make an effort to have watched a few movies between, shows, so I have something to talk about. So it's not just like, Steve, what did you watch this week? I don't know.
Yeah. I love your banter with Jason. He's great.
Jason's the best.
Do you know him from elementary school?
No, actually, we met through YouTube. He's from San Francisco, and we've never actually met in person, and we're going to have to fix that one of these days. But no, he used to be a YouTuber. He had a brilliant YouTube channel called Opinionville, where he did little comedy sketches with puppets that were that he wrote and performed all the parts in, and I mean, and he's just a genius. He's incredible.
Yeah, he's a lot of fun. Your Picard reviews, in particular, when you guys were doing those together, were hilarious.
Oh, those were so much fun. And hopefully, we haven't talked about it specifically, but hopefully when Strange New Worlds comes out for the new season, we're going to review those in the same way. But
Great.
But yeah, we met on YouTube. We knew of each other because we both had YouTube channels, and we would kind of like talk to each other in the comments of each other's videos. And then when the movie Man of Steel came out, which I guess was 2013, I did a live stream about that just to talk about the movie because I'm a big Superman fan and it's the new Superman movie. And I had like a panel on, and Jason was one of the people on for that. And we had a really good chemistry just on stream together. And a few months after that, he, messaged me and said, "Hey, I'm starting a podcast. Do you want to be on my podcast?" And I was like, "Yes, absolutely." So that's kind of, we sort of got to know each other through that. And now we're basically best friends.
That's
But
nice.
and it's cool because he's about 10 years older than I am. We have similar tastes as far as like popular culture and movies and TV shows, but not identical. So we can kind of butt heads, but also, agree on a lot of stuff. So it's a really nice dynamic.
My favorite moment was when you were doing the Picard reviews, season 3, and you were getting all upset because Worf was referencing the changelings, and you were like, "They're making Deep Space Nine references," and then he was like, "But Steve, Worf is a Deep Space Nine character."
That's true. He had me on that. He had me on that. You've got me on a technicality.
Yeah.
I will die on the hill that changeling stuff should not have been in a TNG reunion show. But anyway, yes.
Yeah, I thought your point was well taken too. That it was like, well, that's not really their storyline. That's not the TNG storyline. So
we're good news, everybody. We're bringing back the heroes of TNG to fight the main bad guys
of Deep Space Nine.
It's like, what?
And there are other characters and villains from TNG from the show that I think you could go back and explore, in some way.
I mean, if you have to bring back an old villain, yeah. I mean, other than the Borg, which is what they ultimately did, but I mean, yeah.
Bring back the outrageous Okona, maybe.
Like he's become like a galactic despot or something, and
yeah. Or Vash would be an interesting character to bring back.
Vash's revenge.
Yeah. You got married, did you? Well, I'm not too happy with that.
I saw season 2. Since when did you never have a girlfriend? What about me?
I showed you love. Come on.
Exactly.
Well, Steve, I think that's all of my questions that I wanted to get to today. So thank you so much for coming in and talking with me today. Really appreciate it. We had a lot of live comments here. Just trying to see which ones here. I cannot stress how important it is to have boring politics. If your government are making headlines, it's almost always a bad thing. So
that certainly seems to be the recent trend. Yeah. What did he do this time?
Sean saying here, I had this out with someone the other day. They saw a crash after a joyride and assumed it was an immigrant. Pointed out that we have 92% native populations. So what brought them to think that? Yeah. Like it's just people got to turn down the anger and the rhetoric.
And not be so quick on the trigger as far as making assumptions.
Adam Woodward saying, I have noticed that even NPR has pulled back on the critique of Trump.
I mean, it depends. Like I've heard some NPR stories that have been very critical of Trump and that have drilled down into sort of specifics about a lot of the things that the administration is doing that I haven't seen in other mainstream outlets. But there have also been situations where it has been criticized, and I think probably fairly, for not going as hard as they should have, or for, following the administration's wishes a little too much. So I mean, it's tough, but I think on balance NPR is better than most, but it's not unscathed for sure.
Adam also saying, with every time that Trump or Leave It the press secretary?
The press secretary, yeah.
Yeah, doesn't agree with a reporter and bans them from the press corps, it becomes more and more dangerous. tell the truth or your opinion, and we will take your job away. Yeah, like,
Yeah.
and I guess one thing I did, I guess I said I had all my questions, but I was like, when is it going to get so bad that like the people can't stand it anymore? You know, is what I keep asking myself. But
I mean, it depends on it. I guess it depends on what reaction you're waiting for. I mean, we just had the state of Wisconsin this past week had a state election to choose a new justice on its state Supreme Court. And that's just a state judicial election. But because the state Supreme Court has a lot of sway as far as districting and, that kind of thing, the Republicans really wanted a Republican-leaning justice on the court, so it would presumably rule in their favor if there was ever any kind of dispute. And so the Republican Party and Elon Musk poured just tens of millions of dollars into this state judicial race to try and get their preferred candidate elected, and they lost. And they lost by like a significant margin. Like, it was not a close election. And so a lot of people took encouragement from that and maybe saw that as a glimmer of hope of, maybe finally things have gotten so bad, with Trump's antics and with the tariffs and with the going out of his way to alienate Canada and to alienate the European Union and all of our traditional allies, like, plus all of, the cutting of government programs and gutting foreign aid and all of the things that have been done. Maybe finally enough people are realizing, we can't allow this to happen anymore. And, and hopefully it can still be resolved through electoral politics.
well, hopefully, that's the preferred method. But it feels like this presidency is only. It feels like we're only in the first year of it. And assuming, and that's what a lot of people will say to me, is like, assuming it ends, assuming he doesn't try to stay in power, assuming he doesn't try to take over the government forever. And these are legit concerns, that people in your country have, people outside your country have. And we're just like, oh, this is not good. And I don't know what to do about it. I don't know what the solution is, so
Neither
hopefully,
do I.
like, the best we can hope is that the American people are going to stand for it one way or the other, and whatever that looks like, I hope it comes to pass, I guess, because I don't know. We were talking about Babylon 5 earlier, and in that show, we see the government slowly turn into this authoritarian nightmare until Captain Sheridan and the group, who happen to be on this their space station that is far away from what's happening on Earth, and they're able to say, no, we're breaking away. Spoilers for Babylon 5 if you don't know. And we're going to stand up to this, and we're going, and then they have a whole civil war. But, that's fantasy, and that's, not.
That would never happen. A civil war in the United States, that would never happen.
Exactly, yeah. Even when you look at the history of your civil war, that didn't happen sort of in a vacuum. That was a lead up for decades of tensions.
That was a long time coming. Absolutely. I mean, I think we tend to think of it as something that sort of happened all at once, because like once it happened very quickly. But yeah, it was, it was, the seeds for that were planted, like with our revolution when we first became an independent nation, and our Constitution was drafted to allow, not only to allow slavery to still exist, but to make exceptions and to make considerations for slave-holding states. Like, it was.
But Captain Kirk told me it was the best thing ever written, the best document ever written. What are you talking about?
Well, if you only look at the good parts, sure.
Just we have
stuff about slavery, but don't worry.
We
about
made
that.
an amendment to fix that later, but otherwise perfect. Otherwise, it's perfect. Okay. After decades of the antebellum South. Exactly. Thank you, Norman.
Yeah.
Okay. The more time goes on, the more the Handmaid's Tale of the USA goes. Yeah, like that's kind of the thing, and I don't know. Yeah. I hope it all works out. I hope that in the midterms, we get to the midterms and the Democrats take back the House, and maybe after that the presidency. Hopefully, but that's the best we can seem to do.
That's the goal. But yeah, that's the goal.
But I'll say this one thing: Trump gave us a gift in one sense, because we were on track up here to elect a conservative majority government. And now the Liberal Party has become way more popular all of a sudden. Trudeau stepped out, and now we have this new guy, Mark Carney. And he seems like the best guy to face Trump of the two main options we have, and therefore Trump is driving our election, even though so it's kind of like a bad thing turning into a good thing.
I've heard that. I'm aware of that, and it's for the worst possible reason, but I'm glad that it's happening. That the fact that Trump has been such a dick to Canada for no reason at all,
and relentlessly.
Yeah, and we're going to make it the 51st state, and we're going to start a trade war, and we're going to impose tariffs, and it's like you're doing all of this for no reason. Canada's like our best friend. It's like we're breaking up with our best friend.
It's how it feels. Like our prime minister, Carney, who's currently, he's running to become a true prime minister. Right now, he's kind of like an interim, and he's saying the relationship between of the United States being the leader of the free world is over. The United States leading the post-war global order is over, and these are amazing words for a Canadian prime minister to say.
Absolutely.
Like
it sounds that way from our side too. Yeah.
Yeah, and then Trump was like, "Oh no, he's the prime minister, and he's not a governor at all." And because they apparently had their first phone call a little while ago. So
it's amazing how much of it seems to come down to whether or not Trump personally likes the other world leader. Because he called Trudeau the governor. He said he's the governor of Canada,
of the great state of Canada.
Yeah, but because Trudeau stood up to him, and Trudeau, famously Trudeau resisted the asshole handshake. Trump has the tough guy handshake where he tries to jerk him his direction, and Trudeau, the first time they met, was ready for that and didn't let him do that. And you could see in the video, Trump tries to do it like 2 or 3 times, and Trudeau is he's ready for it, and he's not letting himself get dragged over. And, I think Trump didn't like that. And, Trump hasn't liked other instances where Trudeau has kind of,
I heard some rumor that, Trump maybe made eyes at his wife or something at some point, and he didn't like that. Maybe. I don't know. Who knows what's in his head? Who cares? But but then on the other hand, he's the president of the United States, and he's saying all these things about my country, and it's been amazing just to see Canada has turned not on the American people like yourself, Steve, but on this government and on this direction as a country. That it's
as well you should as my country would if we were disrespected. My country turns on people even when we're not being disrespected. It's just I don't know what Trump expects the reaction to be. I don't think he cares because he just imagines a different reaction in his head. Like he still tells people, people in Canada, they want to be the 51st state. They want to be Americans. And it's like, it doesn't matter how loudly the actual Canadians are like, no, we don't.
No, we especially the French Canadians.
Exactly. It doesn't matter. He just makes up his own reality and he'll just tell people, people in Canada would love to be Americans. Like, it doesn't matter that that's not true.
Because I'd say before all this started, there was some minority of Canadians that were pro-Trump or liked him or whatever, and maybe they still do, but they have all crawled under a rock now.
Yeah.
And so it's been kind of amazing. Like Canadians are only buying Canadian products now, and we're not taking vacations to the States. And but
good for you.
I do want to get back to a point of friendship and I think we're still friends, but it's not like we're enemies. But it's just this is not a great time in the relations of our country. So
and it's like I said, it's on our side for the Americans. It's a self-inflicted wound. Like, it's not like there wasn't like an international incident. It's not like there was some kind of conflict. It was we elected a jerk who just decided to start mistreating Canada for no reason.
For no reason, just this is just bad politics, bad diplomacy, no matter who you are, right? Yeah. So Carney is very pro-European and pro-open market. True. And so Canada's probably going to start making more ties with the UK and with Europe and everything else.
Oh yeah, I think a lot of that's going to. I think there's going to be a lot of reorienting of just international agreements to leave out the United States. Mm-hmm. Because Canada's, why wouldn't you?
Norman's an American. He's saying Canada has always and should resist the occasional annexation to Canada nonsense rhetoric. Well, we're resisting it, but then there's part of us wondering, what if they do come over that border? What if those tanks do come over? What if they try to actually take us over? What are we going to do? Because you outnumber us 10-1, and your military, even if you didn't outnumber us 10-1, your military is massive and strong and overfunded. Right. But what chance do we? This is like the Klingon Empire against Bajor or something, and it's
Because
not.
Canada doesn't seem to have the same inferiority complex that the United States does.
No.
Where it's like we have to be the greatest, we have to be the biggest, we have to be the best, and
Yeah, if anything, that's always been partly of how we defined ourselves is like how are we the same as Americans and how are we different, And one certain way has always been patriotism because Americans have always been like rah rah rah, Pledge of Allegiance, this kind of stuff that we don't have. Like I find when we have Canada Day, it's not like when you have 4th of July. It's
it's not nearly as obnoxious.
It's right, but now, only when there's like a hockey game, I'd say, like when Canada plays USA and like international hockey or something along those lines, do we really get excited? Because it feels like an even playing field.
It's tempting to draw the comparison between the two countries based on our respective national anthems because I've always loved "O Canada" because it seems like just such a nice it's just a description of like love and loyalty for your country. And then our national anthem is remember that time we killed all those people.
Well, it's about the War of 1812, right?
It's about the War of 1812, and it's like, okay, I mean, I get it, but it's like our national anthem is about a war that we won, and it's very martial and very military and very
you didn't win
rooted in that a battle that we survived at least.
You survived. It was like the war was basically a stalemate, and it was
the flag was still there.
The flag was still there,
but Canada's national anthem is more like what you might expect a national anthem to be. It's like it's not as like nice triumphant, and we like it.
And a lot of Canadians will admit that they love the American from just a musical point of view. That the American anthem is just a kind of a better song, but what the words of the Canadian anthem I think are more fitting for a national anthem, and the way you see most of them written.
Yeah,
So anyway.
Last
comment here. Trump's legacy will be aligning a tighter, more single-minded EU. We are 470 million. They are 333. So yeah, Sean's coming from the EU. They are 330 million. Typically, we don't move as one power, but we are more single-minded now. Yeah. So hey, you've united the rest of the world in the States. So
as an American, I hope that is what happens because if our government is choosing to blow up its alliances and draw back from its position, somebody needs to fill that vacuum, and I would much rather it be Europe and Canada, and sort of the old Commonwealth of nations than Russia or China or some other more sort of authoritarian leaning nation.
Right.
I hope the EU and its allies do.
I feel like that's the way we're heading.
And
it's not too long. Well, maybe it is too late to come to your senses over there, but keep doing what you're doing, Steve, because it's
going to take a little while, but hopefully we'll get there.
What you're doing and what others are doing to speak out against it is so important, and you need to keep going because.
Thank you. I'm gonna try until they throw me in a gulag.
Okay, well, hopefully that doesn't happen. Hopefully
that doesn't happen.
Yeah, we can push it back. But okay, well, thanks for being with me today, Steve. You can check out Steve's channel at youtube.com/Steve Shives, right?
That's it.
SHIVES, and subscribe and like if you haven't already. If you didn't know, we just also had on Sean Farrick a week ago from What Culture /Trek Culture. He was just here, so go listen to that interview if you haven't already. He's a great guy. Was on the Star Trek.
I love Sean.
Star Trek cruise and all that. And he's doing a great job as well. As I mentioned, we have our Star Trek The Next Generation reviews ongoing. This next Thursday, we will be covering Season 2, Episode 11, Contagion, with Brent Spiner and Data and the Iconian gateways and everything else. And on Monday, we are kicking off our new series, For All Mankind, as we're going to be going through those episodes, starting with Red Moon on Monday night. So look out for that here on the channel. So... Well, I think that with that, we can sign off for today. And thanks for doing a full 2-hour interview, Steve. We really appreciate it.
It was my pleasure. It was a good conversation.
Yeah, and we'll hope you'll come back, maybe do another review, maybe do another radio theater in the near future.
I would love to.
Okay, well, until then, thanks everyone for being with us, and live long and podcast, and have a good one. See you next time.
Beam up some Star Trek content with Live Long and Podcast. Tune in to X-Rated, the X-Men animated review show. Artistic interviews with graphic histories. A roundtable movie discussion with Hey, did you see this one? And movie reviews with Hold Up, a movie podcast. And while you're at it, spin a few records with Eamon on Track. Watch us duke it out on trivial debates. And let's chat about TV with the Super Mater Brothers. It's all here on the United Federation of Podcasts.